Party's national convention in its third night, and President Trump is moving higher in the polls. Rasmussen today finding President Trump and China Joe Biden in a virtual tie. Biden, 46% support. President Trump, 45%. Biden's support has slipped 2 points since the close of his disastrous Democratic National Convention. President Trump's rising in the poll, correlating with a strong and resounding message this week from his party. Unlike Joe Biden, this president stands with the American people, and he is appealing to working men and women and their families. We heard from a cross-section of working men and women last night who shared how President Trump has restored the economy and used that power to secure more opportunity for all Americans.
President Trump took the necessary action knowing that agriculture is our backbone and strength, critical to our national security. Our entire economy and dairy farming are once again roaring back.
He has followed through on his promises, including last week when he brokered a deal to end European Union tariffs of 8% on Maine live lobsters and up to 20% on Maine lobster products. As long as Trump is president, fishing families like mine will have a voice.
By getting rid of the job-killing NAFTA and negotiating the U.S.-Mexican-Canada trade agreement, President Trump ensured a more competitive playing field for American companies.
President himself, President Trump, featuring in 2 videos, aired at the RNC. In the first, President Trump pardoned a reformed bank robber, John Ponder. Ponder now runs a prisoner reentry program. And another, in which he hosted an immigration naturalization ceremony at the White House. 2 of the president's children, Eric and Tiffany, featured last night. Tiffany Trump indicted the left-wing national media. Eric Trump promised his father will continue his fight for the American family.
People must recognize that our thoughts, our opinions, and even the choice of who we are voting for may and are being manipulated and visibly coerced by the media and tech giants. This manipulation of what information we receive impedes our freedoms rather than allowing Americans the right to form our own beliefs.
Every day, my father fights for the American people, the forgotten man and woman of this country, the ones who embody the American spirit, which is unlike anything else in the world. To our farmers who work dawn to dusk to keep our plates full, my father will fight for you. To every single mother and father, to our veterans, our coal miners, and to the American worker, my father will fight for you. And to every proud American who bleeds red, white, and blue, my father will continue to fight for you.
Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi and an ex-Democrat mayor from a small Minnesota mining town each attacked Joe Biden's half-century career in politics. Both pointed out Biden's public service has principally served the Biden family.
Joe Biden flew to China on Air Force Two with Hunter along for the ride. In Beijing, Hunter didn't just go sightseeing. He had meetings with his Chinese bank partners. Come on, Joe. Talk to the folks in Middle America who lost countless jobs to China while your son was getting rich with them. There have been numerous press reports that have shown other close Biden family members benefited from Joe's 47-year political career.
This is hard for me to say because I am a lifelong Democrat. But for far too long, members of both parties allowed our country to be ripped off by our trading partners, especially China, who dumped steel into our markets and slapped tariffs on our products. And what did so-called leaders like Joe Biden do? Nothing. He has been doing nothing in Washington for 47 years. Why would year 48 be any different?
Tonight's theme at the RNC, the Land of Heroes. Speeches will focus on national security and our military. Vice President Pence speaks tonight from historic Fort McHenry in Baltimore, where he accepts the party's nomination for vice president. We also expect to hear more from President Trump, as well as Second Lady Karen Pence, Kellyanne Conway, Laura Trump, and Kayleigh McEnany. As the RNC continues tonight, the be noted doesn't only have a Democrat problem, but it's something of a rhino problem as well. Kenosha is the home of Rhino Reince Priebus, and it's the district once represented by, well, former Rhino House Speaker Paul Ryan, former Speaker, not former Rhino. Joining us tonight is Congressman Andy Biggs. He's the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, a member of the House Judiciary Committee. And Congressman, I want to first ask your reaction to now the governor, after these tragic deaths, now the governor wants to listen to President Trump and has apparently done so. Your reaction?
Well, it's about time. These riots, this looting, this murder and mayhem have nothing to do with any kind of protest people may have regarding a police incident that took place several days ago. This is all about the left trying to, it's just a bunch of thugs on the left that are trying to basically burn down businesses, torch and destroy this country, and it's a revolution. And so, in my opinion, the governor is way late, but it's better late than never, I suppose. But I'm glad that he's going to let some good guidance and some good assistance from the president, who's on top of this issue, get to Kenosha. Yeah,
it's very clear that Democrat governors and Democrat-run cities, whether we're talking about Portland, Chicago, Seattle, wherever it may be, Kenosha, they're playing politics, and that is not only a shame, it is tragic. And the communities are putting up with it, which is even more devastating, I think, to this country, that we have people who will accept that kind of leadership and governance in their communities, where they really have the greatest control over their lifestyle. Their values are tested there in local communities. And they should be influencing the outcome of governance instead of simply being bystanders. And in Kenosha, for example, they're simply victims. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I've often said that since we're a Republican, we get to vote, we get the government we deserve because we vote for that government. But the kind of government that we've seen in Kenosha, Portland, Chicago, that is, I can't imagine anybody thinking that when they cast their ballot, that they would get leaders who would allow the mayhem and rioting on the streets, that they would tell their police officers to stand down. We may get stuck with the government we deserve because we vote that way, but it's too much.
It's too much, and it's ridiculous that talking with Scott Carpenter, the owner of business in Kenosha last night on this broadcast, they pay taxes. They lived there for their lives, worked there in their businesses for 30 years, and it was burned down by thugs and the Black Lives activists who support them. Why not? Why not just refuse to pay taxes? Who needs to put? What are the people paying taxes for? These mayors standing down their police departments and saying, you take over. I don't know what the young man is going to be found guilty of, if anything. It's clear that he is a suspect, and I don't want to in any way judge the case. But I have to tell you, the responsibility is on that city council and that mayor who stood that police department down, and not because they chose not to protect property, not to protect lives. Don't you agree?
I agree 100%. Saw your interview last night. Great interview, Lou, but you're right on the spot here. Right on the spot. These guys have liability.
Congressman, it's always good to have you with us. We appreciate it. Congressman Andy Biggs. And on Wall Street today, another record-setting performance. The Nasdaq up 199 points. Its 39th record close of the year. The S&P up 35. Its 18th record close of the year. The Dow up 83 points. And volume on the big board picking up to 3.8 billion shares. Crude oil 43.44 at the settlement. I
hope that there is an opportunity and a community that is waiting and willing to offer them a second chance. John, we honor your devotion to showing returning citizens that they are not forgotten. We believe that each person is made by God for a purpose. I will continue to give all Americans, including former inmates, the best chance to build a new life and achieve their own American dream. And a great American dream it is.
It was President Trump pardoning John Ponder last night at the Republican National Convention. Ponder is a convicted felon who is now helping former inmates re-enter society. Meanwhile, eating outside is enough to enrage the radical left. Monday evening, a crowd of mostly white Black Lives Matter protesters surrounded and then harassed diners at a number of restaurants in the nation's capital. Listen to how that all played out. Trump's numbers among black voters is concerning Joe Biden and his campaign and the radical Dems. According to the latest Rasmussen poll, the president's approval rating among black voters has risen to 29%. 29%. Joining us tonight is Bob Woodson, a former civil rights activist. He headed the National Urban League Department of Criminal Justice for 5 years. He's the founder of the Woodson Center, which helps residents in national convention neighborhoods, a great American, and we are delighted to see you again, Bob. John Ponder, pardoned by the president. You worked, I understand, with John Ponder. Tell us a little about him and his contributions to our country.
Well, John is one of our stellar members of the 1776 Unites Consortium. As he said, John found himself in prison, came to Christ, dedicated his life to assisting others. In the past 10 years, John and his organizations, Hope for Prisoners, have worked with 3,000 people returning from prison with only a 6% recidivism rate. He has about 500 volunteers to mentor these men and women who are coming out of prison. And 40% of those volunteers are police officers, many of them the same officers that arrested them. And as a consequence of this important program, violent interactions between police and minority citizens in Las Vegas has been dramatically reduced. And crime also in South Las Vegas has also been reduced. And so it's just a marvelous example of the kind of grassroots leaders that are living in our urban centers. They should be the ones who are supported, as opposed to giving money to Black Lives Matter that are there for the destruction of the community. We need to be donating to community builders like John Ponder. We're so proud of John and his accomplishments.
And I hope that corporate America is giving far more money to John Ponder, to Bob Woodson, than they are to Black Lives Matter. And I think, as a matter of fact, I'm going to speak now to my producers as well as the audience. We're going to put up graphics where if people want to support those organizations. We're going to have that up on our website. We're going to also have it up on this broadcast from now on because the work is too important, and the emphasis by corporate America on the organizations often that they are supporting is just so wrong-headed. We've got to change that. Don't you agree? Somehow, some way.
We really do, Lou. And you were talking about the violence. I was just appalled that when I watched the Democratic National Convention, for not a single word was mentioned about the violence in Chicago, where Black Lives Matter's representatives wiped out the Golden Mile, looted stores, and stole. And when the Black Lives Matter representatives explained it as part of reparations, not a single person at the Democratic mentioned anything about it. Nor did they, and Michelle Obama in her speech, she talked about, of course, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and then she said the list goes on to people who have been murdered. And Kamala Harris said the same thing when she got up. And she mentioned that as if, both of them were fanning the flames of racial discord that continues. Also, Lou, what they didn't mention is that 20 children under the age of 10 were murdered in Chicago, and yet none of the names of those children were ever mentioned at that conference, at that gathering. A young girl like Anissa Scott, 5-year-old, who was praying that she be delivered from violence. And then last week, she, at 11 years old, she was shot to death in Madison, Wisconsin. And yet, these candidates for office say nothing about this. What about justice for these children?
Yeah. And the Democratic Party has a lot of explaining to do about how they chose to use their time last week as they ignored violence that in fact was not condemned by the Democratic Party, but rather accepted. And that is a great shame for this country that they did so. We're going to continue our discussion with Bob Woodson right after these quick messages. Please stay with us. It's worth your while, I assure you. We'll be right back.
You ain't black, who argued that Republicans would put us back in chains, who says there is no diversity of thought in the black community. Mr. Vice President, look at me. I am black. We are not all the same, sir. I am not in chains. My mind is my own, and you can't tell me how to vote because of the color of my skin. Joe Biden is a backwards thinker in a world that is craving forward-looking leadership. There's no wisdom in his record or plan, just a trail of discredited ideas and offensive statements.
Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron, you cannot tell me how to vote by the color of my skin. Condemning Joe Biden for his comments on black voters. We're back with Bob Woodson. Bob, I have to say, I was so impressed by the Attorney General's statements and the almost casual power of his speech. It was terrific, and his statement that you how did he say? I want to be exactly correct in my quotation. I am black. We are not all the same, sir. I am not in chains. My mind is my own, and you can't tell me how to vote because of the color of my skin. Did you rejoice when you heard the Attorney General make those remarks?
Yeah, it was another Declaration of Independence. It
really was.
It was a Declaration of Independence, and I'm so thankful that he said that, because earlier today, when Joe Biden's press secretary was pressed by Dana Perino about what is Biden's response to violence and what is his solution, the man said, well, we're going to end institutional racism. Well, he needs to be pressed on saying, tell me exactly what that is, and then explain what is your remedy for ending it, and then how does that remedy tie into the reduction of violence in black communities, and how does it promote growth and opportunity, create jobs, and help people in those communities to prosper. I think some of these people should be pressed to answer that question. What specifically is your remedy? And so that is what that we need to be doing. But there are more people who express and believe what you just heard than people realize.
Yeah,
they really are.
I think that's one of the most hopeful things we could hear from you, is that is the case, because if we cannot unite around in this country equal opportunity, mutual respect for one another as citizens, and believe that this is fundamentally and foremost a nation of laws, which preserve the integrity of those tenets of self-reliance, independence, the Bill of Rights. I think we as a nation would be lost. And it's exactly, by the way, that is exactly the goal of the Black Lives Matter movements and other left-wing radical dim organizations that are trying to tear the nation asunder. I truly believe that. Yes, sir.
Tomorrow is the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. Al Sharpton is supposed to lead a reenactment of that. And I think it's appropriate and what you're going to hear at that rally is just a condemnation of the country. You're not going to hear Dr. King. I'd like to just to share some of his quotes that he said. Dr. King brought a very message. He said, violence is immoral because it thrives on hatred rather than love. It destroys communities and makes brotherhood impossible. It leaves society in a monologue rather than a dialogue. Violence ends up defeating itself. It creates bitterness in the survivors and brutality in the destroyers. And he also said about the patriotism in his heart. He said that civil rights leaders have taken our nation back to the great wells of democracy, which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the foundation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. This is the King's movement was based on the foundation of this country's ideals of freedom and justice for all. But you will not hear any of that affirmation at this March on Washington rally. It'll be the same blame America first mantra that we've heard. And there'll be silence on how does Black America address the enemy from within. That's what you're going to hear.
I personally, I may hear it. I won't listen to it long, I assure you. And I don't think much of America will either. We've made a decision, I think, already this year about what the stakes are, and they're about the future of this country. And I don't believe Marxism has any place in this country's future. I believe the American people will vote to make that so. Bob Woodson, we always learn and we always appreciate talking with you, and I look forward to next week. Thank you very much. Bob Woodson. If you'd like to donate, by the way, to the Woodson Center, we invite you to go to woodsoncenter.org. That's woodsoncenter.org. By the way, you can also donate to John Ponder's Hope for Prisoners program. Just go to hopeforprisoners.org. Thank you very much. And up next, the radical Dems, are they losing their minds? Are they out of their minds? As the RNC continues to out the healthcare workers, first responders, doctors and nurses across the country during this pandemic, what an amazing job you have all done. The president on night one of the Republican National Convention thanking Americans who've worked in the field from the beginning of this pandemic. And breaking news now, rioters in Seattle tried to burn police officers alive. They used quick-sealing concrete to shut the East Precinct door before starting a fire, attempting to burn down the building and the police officers inside it. Those police officers had to kick the door open to get out. Thankfully, no police officers were injured. The Radical Dems' latest attack against President Trump is to claim a violation of the Hatch Act. It's a federal law limiting some political activities of federal employees. They claim it was illegal that the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, spoke at last night's convention from Jerusalem. The Washington Post's Jennifer Rubin column opines, quote, the RNC is on a Hatch Act crime spree. Wow. Disturbing, isn't it? Some in the left-wing national media know that no one cares about the Hatch Act. Jake Sherman from Politico points out, quote, do you think a single person outside the Beltway gives a hoot about the president politicking from the White House or using the federal government to his political advantage? Do you think any persuadable voter even notices White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows had this to say.
Nobody outside of the Beltway really cares. They expect that Donald Trump is going to promote Republican values, and they would expect that Barack Obama, when he was office, that he would do the same for Democrats. And so, listen, this is a lot of hoopla that's being made about things, mainly because the convention has been so unbelievably successful.
Well, joining us now is former Reagan White House political director, Fox Business political analyst Ed Rollins, the savant himself, and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Post, Fox Business contributor Michael Goodwin. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us. The Hatch Act, I can't imagine. There's one thing that I don't think there's any doubt about, and that is politicians have learned as a result of this president being in office. No one now has either the luxury or the right to bore the American people, and the Democrats haven't learned that lesson. Do you think, Mike?
Well, it is another interesting example. You almost expect Adam Schiff to appear and demand impeachment hearings, before November. It's really extraordinary, Lou, that the Democrats continue to go down this road, that somehow this president is lawless, illegitimate, whatever they can come up with, without ever dealing with the actual policies. I mean, they won't negotiate on the border issues. There's no real budget process anymore. Even the simple thing like another bailout during the coronavirus becomes so crazed. So I do think that there is something to the point that the convention is getting a lot of attention. It's well done. And so this is the Democrats' reaction. Let's sue them. Let's impeach them again.
And the ratings for last night, bearing out what you're saying, up slightly, but still 7% below 2016. But that's an extraordinary performance by any definition. Ed, the idea that I almost said Obama, that Biden thinks he can win a presidential election from a basement, and the idea that the Democratic Party has chosen to campaign against America and Americans. How in the world can you make that even a remote possibility that they would win under those circumstances, those directions?
As I've said to you all along, this is going to get to, regardless of where polls are, this is going to get to be a very, very close election. It's going to be one or two states. Wisconsin may very well be the state that makes the difference here. Either that or it's going to flip, and the president's going to do extremely well and have a bigger victory. But the reality here, talking about the Hatch Act, I was one of the first political directors of the White House ever. Lynn Nofsager was my predecessor, and he left after 6 or 8 months. We put the title on it. I lived with the Hatch Act. I had lawyers travel with me all the time. Jimmy Carter ran his campaign out of the White House. Lyndon Johnson never even set a headquarters up, ran it out of the White House. Richard Nixon's Secretary of Commerce was the fundraiser, and his Attorney General was initially the campaign manager. That's the way it was. The Hatch Act is about you shaking down employees for money to get a job. Yeah. That's the whole intent of it. The intent was not to be able to use the White House. I think one of the wonderful things about this, and I applaud the president for doing this, he's sharing both his job and what he does every day and the beauty of our nation's capital, the White House. And I think the country's enjoying that.
The message from this convention, Mike. Michael, this is just, to me, an amazing performance by the Trump family, who've been beaten and battered and have sacrificed so much, of course, for the country and for this president. This president has made immense sacrifices. But to see his family stand up for him and for America in this convention has been heartwarming. It's been inspiring. I have never seen the likes of it by any president or his family before. Have you?
Well, no, and I mean, In truth, not many families are that large from the presidents and recent presidents anyway. But I must say, Lou, that the Trump family writ large, the Trump campaign team, I think they've done an excellent job in addressing fundamental issues, both in terms of policy and in terms of what is perceived by their own pollsters as the president's weaknesses in the campaign. I think they've been very smart about the way they've approached their speakers list, about the way they like a team passing the ball. They move the ball around very quickly, and the evening moves quickly, and it's very upbeat. Very important to be upbeat, I think, given what the Democrats are talking about.
And the First Lady
Michael,
was
thanks so much, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ed.
I said the First Lady was spectacular. You had to be very proud of what she said, what she did. She was just spectacular.
I couldn't agree more. Up next, the radical Dems finding another way to use impeachment witness